the guardian of the last star, the promise that defied time. Good evening, souls seeking refuge in the whisper of stories. Have you ever whispered a deep longing to the infinite tapestry of the night? And what if one of those distant lights, a point of celestial fire, had answered you? Tonight, on the corner of lost stories, I will take you to a cliffside whipped by wind and salt. There stands a solitary lighthouse, a silent witness to the embrace between the sea and the firmament. This is the story of Elian, the last lighthouse keeper, and his pact with a dying star. Elian was not born in the lighthouse, but the lighthouse was born in him. He arrived as a young man full of dreams that the sea soon claimed, leaving him only the solace of the heights. His only companions were the gulls, and the cyclical language of the light he himself governed, a sweeping beam of hope in the darkness. Night after night, while the world slept, Elian learned to read the sky, not with the science of astronomers, but with the heart of a poet. Each constellation was a poem, each planet a solitary traveler. But one star, and only one, spoke to him in a different way. It was not the brightest or the most famous. It was a small bluish point on the edge of the Milky Way, a light that seemed to flicker with a peculiar cadence. Elian christened it Lyra. He felt its flicker was not random. It was a conversation, a code of light across the void. He began to answer. With the great lamp of the lighthouse, he created sequences, patterns of light that broke the monotony of its rotation. One long flash, too short, a pause, a rapid pulse. It was his way of saying, I see you. You are not alone. Sailors passing through those waters sometimes reported strange light signals coming from the lighthouse, but they attributed them to the keeper's loneliness. They did not know they were witnessing the most extraordinary dialogue in history, one that crossed millions of light years in an instant. If you have ever felt a connection that defies all logic, show it with a like, so that this light never fades. Lyra told him stories. With its pulses, it showed him the birth of galaxies, the silence of nebulae, and the dance of comets. Elian, in turn, told it about the world. He spoke of the green of meadows after the rain, the warmth of the sun on the skin, the taste of a ripe apple. He described the sound of a child's laughter, something he had almost forgotten, and the warmth of an embrace, something he no longer had. The years passed like the tides. Elian's skin became weathered like old leather, and his hair turned the color of sea foam. The world changed. Ships no longer needed lighthouses as much, relying on their new navigation instruments. An official letter arrived. The lighthouse was to be automated. A cold, efficient machine would replace his hand on the switch. They offered him retirement in an inland town, far from the sea that was his life and the sky that was his confidant. Elian refused. He made a deal with the authorities. He could stay on as an unofficial caretaker, without pay, with only the roof of the lighthouse over his head. He knew he could not abandon his post. He could not abandon Lyra. One night, the star's flicker changed. It grew slower, weaker. There was a melancholy in its light, a farewell. Elian understood with a clarity that chilled him to the bone. His friend, his distant confidant, was fading. Stars die, too. That night, their conversation was the longest and most profound. There were no stories of galaxies, only the silent promise between two souls. Lyra, with its last pulses of energy, promised him that it would gather all its strength to shine one last time, a final flash just for him. And Elian, with tears carving paths through his wrinkles, promised he would be there to see it, so that its light would not die in the solitude of the cosmos. He consulted the old astronomical almanacs he kept. He discovered that a supernova in that region of the sky was imminent. Science confirmed what his heart already knew. The date was marked. It would take place on the night of the winter solstice. Elian prepared for that night as a priest prepares for his most sacred rite. He cleaned the lighthouse lens until it shone like a diamond. He polished every piece of brass in the mechanism, even though he no longer operated it. It was a matter of honor, of respect. He wanted his lighthouse, his home, to be perfect for his friend's farewell. But fate, often cruel, had other plans. The weather reports began to announce the arrival of a storm. Not just any storm, but the one old sailors called the Kraken's Roar, a tempest that was unleashed only once a century. Hurricane-force winds and waves the size of hills were bearing down on the coast, right on the night of the solstice. Elian looked at the sky, overcast and gray. A cold anguish seized him. How could he see Lyra's final light through that impenetrable veil? The storm arrived with the fury of a vengeful god. The wind howled like 1,000 wolves, and the sea slammed against the cliff with colossal force. The lighthouse, which had withstood a century of battering, groaned and creaked under the pressure. The power failed. The automatic light system went out. The lighthouse fell dark for the first time in 100 years. Elian, his old and tired body shot through with adrenaline, knew he could not fail. Not now. He descended into the bowels of the lighthouse, to the old emergency generator. It hadn't been used in decades. With trembling hands and a strength born only of devotion, he pulled the starter cord again and again. The engine coughed, sputtered smoke, but finally roared to life, reviving the machinery. The lighthouse beam began to turn again, an act of defiance against the storm's omnipotent darkness. But Elian knew it wasn't enough. Lyra had promised him a sign. He had to make sure the sky was clear for her. It was a wild idea, a madness born of desperation, but it was all he had. He climbed to the outer cupola of the lighthouse, to the walkway that encircled the great lantern. The wind hit him like a solid wall, nearly tearing him from the railing. The freezing rain blinded him. He tied himself to the rail with an old sailor's rope. He held on with all his might, a tiny man against the fury of nature. And he shouted. He shouted at the sky, at the storm, at the winds. He pleaded with them, commanded them, begged them for a truce. He told them of his promise, of the sacred pact with a light about to be extinguished. He screamed that a farewell deserved a clear sky, that a life of light could not end in the darkness of a storm. The sea roared indifferent. The wind howled mocking. It was a futile effort, the delirium of a lonely old man. Suddenly, a dreadful crack echoed above the din. A wave, larger and more monstrous than the rest, had struck the base of the lighthouse with unheard-of violence. The impact shot up through the stone structure. Elian watched, in slow motion, as one of the thick glass panes of the lantern fractured. Then, with a dull explosion, the glass shattered. Wind and salt water invaded the dome, extinguishing the bulb with a hiss. The light of the lighthouse, his lighthouse, was gone. The darkness was absolute. Elian felt his heart break along with the glass. He had failed. His promise had drowned in the storm. He fell to his knees on the walkway, the rope keeping the wind from dragging him into the abyss. The icy rain was his own tears. "Forgive me, Lyra," he whispered to the wind. "I have failed you." He closed his eyes, waiting for the sea to claim what was left of him. The cold began to numb his limbs. It was then that he felt something strange. A subtle change in the atmosphere. The howl of the wind seemed to lessen for an instant. The air pressure shifted. He opened his eyes, and what he saw took his breath away. Directly above him, in the very eye of the storm, a perfect circle had opened in the clouds. It was as if a divine hand had parted the tempest's veil, creating a direct window to the cosmos. And there, in the center of that window, was Lyra, but it was not the twinkling dot he knew. It was an explosion of light, a blue and white sun that burned with the intensity of 1,000,000 dawns. It was so brilliant it illuminated the raging sea, the rocks of the cliff, and the tear-streaked face of the old lighthouse keeper. It was a spectacle of beauty and violence, the final act of a stellar life, a glorious and magnificent farewell. Elian reached a trembling hand toward the light, as if he could touch it. The flash lasted only a few seconds, but in Elian's perception, it stretched for an eternity. He saw everything in that light: Lyra's birth, its long and solitary existence, their conversation across the void, and the promise fulfilled. The light vanished, leaving behind a nebula of ghostly colors, the ghost of a star. Then the clouds closed in again, and the storm resumed its fury, but it no longer mattered. Elian smiled, a smile of peace and fulfillment. He slowly untied himself, and with what little strength he had left, went back inside the lighthouse. He sat in his old armchair, facing the window that looked out on the now dark sea. His heart, which had beaten to the rhythm of the promise, began to slow its pace. He had fulfilled his purpose. He had been the guardian, not just of a lighthouse, but of a star's last breath. He closed his eyes for the last time, and in the darkness behind his eyelids, Lyra's light shone eternally. The next morning, when the storm subsided, the Coast Guard found the lighthouse damaged and dark. They found Elian in his armchair, a serene smile on his face. The world remembered him as the last eccentric lighthouse keeper on the coast. But a few sailors and amateur astronomers who were watching the sky that night reported an anomalous event: an explosion of light of unknown origin, visible for a few seconds through an inexplicable breach in the worst storm of the century. No one could explain it. No one could connect the death of a lonely old man with the death of a distant star. But sometimes the greatest stories are the ones written in silence, with ink made of starlight, and in the hearts of those who dare to listen. The lighthouse still stands, automated and soulless. But the locals say that on the clearest nights, if you look toward where that little blue star used to be, you can sometimes see a flash, a nearly imperceptible pulse of light, like the echo of a conversation that neither time nor distance could erase. The story of Elian and Lyra teaches us that the deepest promises need no words, and that the strongest connections can bridge the greatest chasms, even the one between a man and a star. What promises have marked your lives? Is there a light, distant or near, that guides your nights? Share your thoughts in the comments, for each comment is another star in the sky of this little corner. If this story brightened a moment of your night, please leave a like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so that the echo of our stories will always find its way to you. Until next time.